Blood was already soaking through the industrial carpet when the flight attendant stepped back and said coldly, "He tripped." The 8-year-old lay stunned on the jetway floor, his nose twisted, his small hands shaking as strangers stared. He had said please 11 times that day. It hadn't saved him. What she didn't know, what no one in that terminal yet understood, was that the man pushing past the paramedics wasn't just a terrified father. He controlled nearly half the airline's fleet, and in less than 10 seconds, one phone call would begin dismantling everything she believed protected her. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories of justice and truth, subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from so we can see just how far this story travels. Marcus Thompson had been flying since before he could walk. His mother used to joke about it, saying that boy had more frequent flyer miles than most grown men before he even lost his first tooth. At 8 years old, Marcus had already crossed the Atlantic, twice visited 11 states, and could navigate an airport terminal better than half the adults stumbling through them. He knew how to check in. He knew how to find his gate. He knew how to sit quietly and read his book and not bother anyone. His father had taught him that. His father had taught him a lot of things. But the one thing Marcus's father never taught him was how to handle what happened on Delta National Flight 2714 from Atlanta to Chicago on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Nobody teaches their child that. Nobody thinks they have to. The gate agent at Hartsfield-Jackson had been kind enough. She'd looked at his unaccompanied minor paperwork, smiled at him, and said, "You've done this before, haven't you, sweetheart?" Marcus had nodded politely and said, "Yes, ma'am, about 12 times now." She'd laughed and walked him down the jetway herself, holding his hand, making small talk about whether he liked football or basketball. Marcus told her he liked chess. She'd laughed again and said, "Well, aren't you something?" She handed him off to the lead flight attendant at the aircraft door, a woman named Sandra Whitley. Blonde hair, pulled tight lips pressed together like she was already annoyed before the passengers even started boarding. She looked down at Marcus, and the smile she gave the gate agent dissolved like sugar in acid. "Another one," Sandra muttered under her breath. She didn't think Marcus heard her, but he did. "Excuse me," the gate agent said, still smiling, not quite catching it. "I said, I'll take it from here," Sandra said louder, reaching for Marcus's paperwork without looking at him. The gate agent hesitated for just a moment. Something flickered across her face, but she let go of Marcus's hand, patted his shoulder, and said, "Have a great flight, baby." Then she walked back up the jetway and disappeared. Marcus stood at the entrance of the plane, holding his backpack straps with both hands. He looked up at Sandra Whitley. She didn't look back. "Your seat's in 14. C," she said flatly. "Go find it." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. He walked down the aisle carefully, the way his father taught him, keeping his backpack close so it didn't bump anyone. He found row 14. His seat was the aisle. Next to him in the middle sat an elderly white woman with reading glasses and a crossword puzzle. She looked up when Marcus arrived. "Well, hello there," she said warmly. "Are you traveling all by yourself?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. "I'm going to see my dad in Chicago." "Isn't that wonderful? I'm Dorothy." "What's your name?" "Marcus. Nice to meet you, Miss Dorothy." Dorothy smiled wide. "Oh, I like you already. Your parents raised you right." Marcus settled into his seat, buckled himself in without being asked, pulled his book out of his backpack, and placed the bag neatly under the seat in front of him. He did everything exactly the way he was supposed to. He did everything right. It didn't matter. Sandra Whitley walked down the aisle 15 minutes after takeoff, pushing the beverage cart. She was smiling at passengers as she went, smiling at the businessman in 10A, smiling at the couple in 11D and E, smiling at the woman with the baby in 12B. But when she reached row 14, the smile stopped. "What do you want?" she said. Not a question, a demand. Marcus looked up from his book. "May I have an apple juice, please?" Sandra stared at him for a moment. Then she reached into the cart, grabbed a cup, poured the juice about halfway, and set it on his tray table, hard enough that some of it splashed over the rim. "There," she said. Dorothy glanced over her crossword glasses. She didn't say anything, but her lips tightened. "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus said quietly. Sandra was already moving on her smile, returning instantly for the passenger in row 15. "And what can I get for you, sir? We've got coffee, tea, water, soft drinks." Marcus wiped the spilled juice off his tray with his napkin. He didn't complain. He didn't say a word. He just cleaned it up and went back to reading. 20 minutes later, turbulence hit. It came without warning the way it sometimes does. The plane jolted hard. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Passengers grabbed their armrests. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and professional, advising everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. Marcus was buckled in. His juice, however, was not. The cup slid off his tray table and tumbled into the aisle, splashing apple juice across the floor and onto Sandra Whitley's shoes. She'd been walking back toward the front when it happened. She stopped dead. She looked down at her shoes. Then she looked at Marcus. "Are you kidding me?" she said. Her voice was loud enough that passengers 3 rows in either direction turned to look. "I'm sorry," Marcus said immediately. "The turbulence knocked it over. I'm really sorry." "Do you know how much these shoes cost?" Sandra said, stepping closer. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It was an accident." "An accident, right. Just like it's an accident every time one of you people can't follow simple rules." The air in the cabin changed. Dorothy put down her crossword puzzle. The businessman in 10A turned fully around in his seat. A woman across the aisle lowered her magazine. "I had my seatbelt on." Marcus said, his voice smaller now. "The cup just fell." "The cup just fell," Sandra repeated mockingly. "Cups don't just fall. You were messing around. I've been watching you since you got on this plane." "I was reading my book," Marcus whispered. "Don't talk back to me." Dorothy spoke up. "Ma'am, the boy is telling the truth. The turbulence knocked the cup over. I saw it happen." Sandra turned to Dorothy with a look that could freeze water. "I wasn't speaking to you." "Well, I'm speaking to you," Dorothy said firmly. "And what I saw was a cup falling during turbulence. That's all that happened here." Sandra's jaw tightened. She looked at Dorothy for a long moment, then back at Marcus. Something dark passed behind her eyes. Something that had been there long before this flight. Long before this boy, long before this moment. It was old and ugly, and it had been fed for years. "Clean it up," Sandra said to Marcus. "I don't have any more napkins," Marcus said. "Then get on your hands and knees and use your shirt for all I care. You made the mess. You clean it." "Now, wait just a minute," Dorothy said, starting to unbuckle her seatbelt. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to remain in your seat, or I will have you removed from this flight when we land." Dorothy stopped. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from anger. Marcus started to get up. He was going to do it. He was actually going to get down on his hands and knees and clean the floor because that's what he'd been told to do. And his father had taught him to respect adults and follow instructions even when things felt wrong. "Sit down, baby," Dorothy said softly, putting her hand on his arm. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, he does," Sandra snapped. "No," Dorothy said, and her voice had a quality to it now that made the people around them pay very close attention. "He does not—" The 2 women locked eyes. Sandra was younger, taller, in uniform, in authority. Dorothy was 73 years old with arthritic hands and a crossword puzzle. But Dorothy didn't blink. Sandra broke first. She grabbed a towel from the cart herself and threw it on the floor over the spill. She kicked it around with her foot to mop up the juice, then picked it up and tossed it back on the cart. "If there's one more incident," she said, pointing at Marcus, "one more. I'm filing a behavioral report and you won't be flying unaccompanied on this airline again. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. He was working very hard not to cry. Sandra walked away. Dorothy reached over and squeezed Marcus's hand. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "Not one thing. You hear me?" Marcus nodded, but his chin was trembling. 45 minutes went by. Marcus didn't move. He didn't get up to use the bathroom, even though he needed to. He didn't ask for another drink, even though he was thirsty. He sat perfectly still with his book open on his lap, but he wasn't reading anymore. He was just sitting, existing, trying to take up as little space as possible. Dorothy watched him from the corner of her eye and felt something breaking inside her chest. The second flight attendant, a younger woman named Keisha, came by row 14 during her rounds. She noticed Marcus sitting rigid, his eyes red. "Hey, sweetie," Kesha said, kneeling down to his level. "You okay?" Marcus looked at her. He opened his mouth to say, "Yes, ma'am," the way he always did, but nothing came out. He just nodded. Keisha looked at Dorothy. Dorothy shook her head slightly. A silent communication between two people who both understood exactly what had happened. "I'm going to bring you some cookies," Kesha whispered to Marcus. "The good ones from first class. Don't tell anyone." She brought him 2 chocolate chip cookies wrapped in a napkin. Marcus held them in his lap and said, "Thank you, ma'am." Kesha touched his cheek gently and went back to work. Marcus ate 1 cookie. He wrapped the other one in the napkin and put it in his backpack. Later, when asked why, he would say, "I was saving it for my dad." That sentence would end up being replayed 47 million times on the internet. The descent into Chicago began. The captain announced 30 minutes to landing. The seatbelt sign had been on for a while. Passengers were putting away their things, closing their laptops, tucking their books into bags. Marcus needed to use the bathroom. He had needed to for over an hour. He was 8 years old, and he had been holding it because he was afraid that if he got up, something bad would happen, but he couldn't hold it anymore. He pressed the call button. Nobody came. He pressed it again. A full minute passed. Then Sandra Whitley appeared at the end of the aisle. She saw the light above row 14, and her face hardened. She walked over slowly, deliberately. "What I need to use the bathroom," Marcus said. "Please." "The seatbelt sign is on." "I know, but I really have to go. I've been waiting a long time." "You should have gone earlier." "I was afraid to get up," Marcus said. And the honesty of it, the raw truth of a child admitting he had been too scared to stand up in an airplane hung in the air like smoke. Sandra didn't flinch. "Hold it, I can't. You're going to have to, please," Marcus said, and now his eyes were filling up. "Please, I really can't hold it anymore." Dorothy had had enough. "For God's sake, let the child use the restroom. He's 8 years old. The seatbelt sign is on, ma'am. Federal regulations. I've been flying for 50 years, and I have seen dozens of people get up to use the lavatory during descent. You and I both know that. Stop this." Sandra leaned down close to Dorothy. "One more word from you, and I'm having security meet this plane." Dorothy opened her mouth. Then she closed it, not because she was afraid, because she could see Marcus watching, and she could see the terror in his eyes. And she knew that if security came, this child would be even more frightened. So Dorothy did something else instead. She pulled out her phone, turned on the camera, and held it in her lap with the lens facing up. Sandra didn't notice. Marcus squirmed in his seat. His face was twisted with discomfort and humiliation. He was an 8-year-old boy who was about to wet himself on an airplane because a grown woman wouldn't let him use the bathroom, and every second of it was being recorded. "Please," Marcus said one more time. Just that one word, "please." Sandra looked at him, and then she said something that would later be played in a courtroom on national television and in front of a congressional subcommittee. "You people always want special treatment. Sit there and deal with it like everybody else." A man in row 13 turned around. He was middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap, and he had been listening to every word. "Lady, let the kid go to the bathroom." "What is wrong with you, sir? This doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone on this plane. He's a child. He's a discipline problem. He's been sitting there quiet as a mouse for 2 hours. I've been watching. The only problem on this plane is you." Sandra's face went red. "I'm a senior flight attendant with 12 years of experience, and I will not be spoken to like this. You will all remain in your seats, or I will divert this aircraft." She was bluffing. Everyone knew she was bluffing. A flight attendant can't divert an aircraft, but the threat worked well enough to silence the man in row 13. Because in the post-9/11 world, nobody wants to be the person who caused a scene on an airplane. Marcus couldn't hold it anymore. He couldn't. He was 8, and his body simply gave out. He felt the warmth spread across his lap and down his legs and into the seat cushion, and the shame that flooded through him was worse than any physical pain he had ever felt in his short life. He didn't cry. He went completely silent. He stared straight ahead, and his face went blank, and something behind his eyes shut off like a light being switched. Dorothy saw it happen. She watched this child just leave himself, just go somewhere else inside his own head, because the reality of what was happening was too much for an 8-year-old to process. Tears rolled down Dorothy's face. She grabbed Marcus's hand and held it tight, and she said, "Don't you dare be ashamed. Don't you dare. This is not your fault." Sandra smelled it before she saw it. She wrinkled her nose and looked at Marcus, and she said, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me. You disgusting little—" "Don't you finish that sentence," Dorothy said with a fury that made her voice tremble. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Sandra stopped, but the disgust on her face was a sentence of its own. Keisha, the younger flight attendant, rushed over. She assessed the situation in 2 seconds. Her face cycled through about 5 emotions in rapid succession before settling on professional composure. "Marcus, honey, let's get you cleaned up," Kesha said softly. "Come with me. He's not going anywhere." Sandra said the seatbelt sign. Sandra. Kesha's voice dropped low. Dangerous, low move. Something in Keisha's tone made Sandra step back. Maybe it was the fact that Keisha was recording too. Maybe it was the realization that every passenger within 5 rows was now staring at Sandra with open contempt. Maybe it was something else. Kesha unbuckled Marcus and helped him up. His pants were soaked. Every person who saw him looked away quickly, not out of disgust, but out of the instinct to give a humiliated child some small shred of privacy. Kesha walked him to the lavatory. She waited outside the door. When Marcus came out, she had somehow found a pair of children's sweatpants from a lost and found bin. Where she found them in the middle of a flight, nobody ever figured out. She handed them to Marcus through the cracked door. "Pick your time, sweetie," she said. Marcus changed and came out. His eyes were still blank. That worried Kesha more than anything else. Kids cry. Kids throw fits. Kids act out. But when a child goes quiet and empty like that, something has been broken that doesn't fix easily. She walked him back to his seat. Dorothy had used her own sweater to cover the wet seat cushion. Marcus sat down on it without a word. "Thank you, Miss Dorothy," he said mechanically. "Of course, baby." Kesha returned to the front galley. She found Sandra restocking the beverage cart as if nothing had happened. Kesha closed the curtain between the galley and the cabin. "What is wrong with you?" Keisha said. "Excuse me." "That child. What you did to that child." "I didn't do anything to that child. He urinated on himself." "That's not my problem. He urinated on himself because you wouldn't let him use the bathroom." The seatbelt sign was on. I followed protocol. "Protocol, Sandra." "I watched you let a man from row 9 go to the bathroom 20 minutes ago. The seatbelt sign was on then, too." Sandra's eyes flickered. That was different. How was it different? Sandra didn't answer. "I'll tell you how it was different," Kesha said. "That man was white. That's how it was different. Don't you dare play that card with me. It's not a card, Sandra. It's a fact. I've flown with you for 6 months, and I have watched you treat every black passenger on every flight like they're a problem to be managed. I've seen it. Other crew members have seen it. And today you did it to a child, an 8-year-old child. You need to be very careful right now," Sandra said quietly. "No, you need to be very careful because when we land, I am filing a report. You file whatever you want. I've been here 12 years. You've been here 18 months. Who do you think they're going to believe?" Kesha stared at her. Sandra stared back. And in that moment, both of them knew the truth of what Sandra had just said. 12 years of seniority, a union, a system that protected its own. Kesha was young, black, and relatively new. The math was ugly, but it was accurate. "I don't care who they believe," Kesha said. "I know what I saw." She pushed through the curtain and went back into the cabin. The plane touched down at O'Hare at 4:47 p.m. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood opened overhead bins, gathered their things. The ritual of arrival. Marcus didn't move. He sat in his seat with his hands folded in his lap, wearing borrowed sweatpants, staring at nothing. Dorothy leaned over. "Marcus." "Honey, is someone meeting you at the gate?" my dad, Marcus said. "Good. That's good." Dorothy hesitated. "Marcus, I want you to tell your dad everything that happened today. Every single thing." "Can you do that for me?" Marcus nodded. Dorothy reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and pressed it into Marcus's hand. "You give this to your father. My name is Dorothy Henderson. I saw everything. I'll tell anyone who asks exactly what happened on this airplane." Marcus took the card and put it in his pocket. "Thank you, Miss Dorothy. You're a good boy, Marcus. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not." Passengers began filing out. Dorothy stood, looked down at Marcus one more time, and walked toward the exit. As she passed Sandra Whitley at the aircraft door, she stopped. "You should be ashamed of yourself," Dorothy said. Sandra's smile didn't waver. "Have a nice evening, ma'am." Dorothy walked off the plane. Marcus was the last passenger on board, as was standard for unaccompanied minors. Sandra was required by policy to walk him off the plane and deliver him to whoever was waiting at the gate. She gathered his paperwork and stood at the end of his row. "Get your things. Let's go." Marcus stood. He picked up his backpack. He walked toward the door, and as he stepped into the aisle, Sandra moved to let him pass, but she didn't move enough. Her knee caught Marcus's hip. It might have been an accident. It might not have been. But Marcus stumbled sideways and bumped into the beverage cart that hadn't been fully stowed. "Watch where you're going," Sandra snapped. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "You've been nothing but trouble this entire flight." Kesha appeared from the back of the plane. "Sandra, I'll walk him off." "No, he's my responsibility. Chain of custody." Kesha's fists clenched at her sides, but she knew the rules. The lead attendant had authority over unaccompanied minors. She couldn't override it without cause, and a knee bump in an aisle wouldn't qualify. "I'll be right behind you," Keisha said. It was as much a warning as a statement. Sandra walked Marcus up the jetway. He walked ahead of her, small and quiet, his backpack hanging off one shoulder. The jetway was long and slightly uphill, and Marcus was tired and emotionally drained, and his legs felt heavy. He slowed down. "Move faster," Sandra said. Marcus tried. He walked quicker, but his borrowed sweatpants were too long and he stepped on the hem and stumbled. He didn't fall. He caught himself, but the stumble put him right in Sandra's path, and she was walking fast. And what happened next happened in less than 2 seconds. Sandra's right foot came forward. Her knee drove into Marcus's lower back. The impact launched him forward and down. His backpack flew off his shoulder. His hands shot out in front of him, but the jetway floor came up too fast, and his face hit the industrial carpet with a sickening thud. The crack was audible. Marcus rolled onto his side. Blood was pouring from his nose. His eyes were wide-shocked, the blank emptiness replaced now by pure animal pain. He opened his mouth, and a sound came out that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a cry. It was the sound a child makes when the world has become something they no longer recognize. Kesha was 15 feet behind them. She saw everything. "Oh my God!" Keisha screamed, running forward. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus. Blood was pooling on the jetway carpet. His nose was clearly broken, pushed to one side, already swelling. "Don't move, baby. Don't move. You're okay. I've got you." She looked up at Sandra. Sandra was standing 3 feet away, frozen. Her face was white. "He tripped," Sandra said. "I saw you," Kesha said. Her voice was ice and fire at the same time. "I saw you kick him." "He tripped. He stepped on his pants and he tripped. You kicked a child. I watched you kick an 8-year-old child in the back. That's not what happened. I have eyes, Sandra, and so does that camera. Kesha pointed to the security camera mounted at the junction where the jetway met the terminal. The red light was on. It was recording. Sandra looked at the camera. Her white face went whiter. Marcus was crying now, full heaving sobs. Blood and tears mixing together on his face, dripping onto the carpet, onto his shirt, onto the sweatpants that a kind flight attendant had found for him 30 minutes ago, because the last indignity wasn't enough. Kesha pulled napkins from her pocket and pressed them gently against Marcus's nose. Keep your head forward, sweetie. I know it hurts. Help is coming. She grabbed her radio. This is Keisha Williams, crew member on Flight 2714. I need medical assistance at Gate B-17 immediately. I have an injured, unaccompanied minor, 8 years old. Possible broken nose. There is significant bleeding. Send medical now. The radio crackled back. Copy. Medical team en route to B-17. Sandra hadn't moved. She was still standing there staring at the blood on the carpet. And something was happening on her face that looked less like remorse and more like calculation. She was figuring out her story. She was building her defense. She was arranging the words in her head that would make this the child's fault. Marcus looked up at Kesha through blood and tears. I want my dad, he said. Please, I want my dad. He's right outside that door, baby. He's waiting for you right now. We're going to get you to him, okay? I promise. Is my nose broken? Marcus asked. Kesha looked at his nose. It was broken. Obviously badly broken. The doctors are going to take really good care of you, she said, which wasn't an answer, but it was the best she could do without lying. The jetway door to the terminal opened. 2 paramedics rushed in with a medical kit. Behind them, a gate agent. Behind the gate agent, pushing past everyone with the force of a man who has been told his child is hurt, came a tall figure in a dark suit. He was 6'3", broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, a face that belonged in a boardroom or on the cover of a magazine. He moved with the kind of calm authority that made people step aside without being asked. His name was David Thompson. He was the founder and CEO of Meridian Holdings, a $2.7 billion investment and leasing corporation that held controlling interests in commercial real estate logistics, infrastructure, and aviation fleet management. His company leased aircraft to 4 of the 6 major domestic carriers, including the one that operated Flight 2714. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. Right now, he was just a father who could see his son's blood on the floor. David pushed past the paramedics. He dropped to his knees on the jetway carpet. He pulled Marcus into his arms and held him against his chest. Marcus buried his bloody face into his father's white dress shirt and sobbed. David held the back of his son's head with one hand. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just held him. His eyes were closed and his jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. When he opened his eyes, they were wet, but they were also something else, something that Sandra Whitley, standing 5 feet away, recognized on a primal level. They were the eyes of a man who was about to dismantle everything she had ever known. "Who did this?" David said. His voice was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. Kesha spoke first. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Kesha Williams. I'm a flight attendant on this aircraft. Your son was assaulted by a crew member in this jetway approximately 4 minutes ago. I witnessed the entire incident. The security cameras also recorded it." She paused. "That woman right there, her name is Sandra Whitley. She kicked your son in the back, causing him to fall face first onto the floor." David looked at Sandra. Sandra looked back at him, and in the space between their eyes, a war began that would end. Careers collapse stock prices, fill courtrooms, and change an industry. "He tripped," Sandra said, but her voice cracked on the second word. David said nothing. He turned back to his son. He wiped the blood from Marcus's face with his own hand gently, carefully, the way only a parent can. "I'm here," David said. Daddy's here. Nobody's gonna hurt you again." He reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand and pulled out his phone. He dialed one number. It rang twice. James David said, "Shut it down. All of it. Every lease, every contract, every pending agreement with Delta National Airlines. Freeze their fleet. I want them grounded by morning." He ended the call. It had taken 9 seconds. Sandra Whitley watched him put the phone away. She didn't understand yet what had just happened. She wouldn't understand for several hours. But when she did, when the full scope of what that 9-second phone call meant became clear, she would sit in her kitchen at 200 in the morning and realize that her career, her pension, her reputation, and her entire life as she knew it had ended on a jetway carpet stained with a child's blood, and she would have no one to blame but herself. The paramedics worked on Marcus, right there on the jetway floor. One of them, a heavy-set man with gentle hands, tilted Marcus's head forward and pressed gauze against his nose, while the other checked his pupils with a penlight. David never let go of his son's hand. Not once. He knelt on the blood-stained carpet in his $3,000 suit, and he held that boy's hand like it was the only thing keeping him from tearing the walls apart. "His nose is fractured," the paramedic said. "We need to get him to a hospital for imaging. Could be a clean break, but I want to rule out any damage to the orbital bone." "Do whatever you need to do," David said. "Dad," Marcus said through the gauze, "it hurts." "I know, son, I know it hurts. But these men are going to help you, and I'm not going anywhere." Sandra Whitley was still standing 5T away. She hadn't moved. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and she was watching the paramedics work on Marcus with an expression that kept shifting between concern and something harder, something more calculating. She was already rehearsing, already editing, already building the version of events that would protect her. A gate supervisor named Rick Calloway came jogging up the jetway. He was out of breath, red-faced, his tie loosened. He'd been paged 3 times in 2 minutes. He took one look at the blood on the floor, the child on the ground, the paramedics, and the tall man in the suit, and his stomach dropped. "What happened here?" Rick said. Sandra spoke first. "The child tripped on his pants during deplaning. It was an accident. I was escorting him as per unaccompanied minor protocol, and he stumbled and fell." Kesha stepped forward. "That is a lie." Rick looked at Kesha, then at Sandra, then at the blood, then at the security camera above them with its steady red light. "She kicked him," Kesha said. "I was walking behind them. I watched her drive her knee into his back. He went face first into the floor. His nose broke on impact. That camera recorded the whole thing. That is absolutely not what happened," Sandra said. And her voice was steady, now controlled the voice of a woman who had spent 12 years navigating airline bureaucracy and knew exactly which words to use and which tone to adopt. Rick held up both hands. "Okay, we're going to sort this out. Right now, my priority is the child. Your priority," David said, standing up slowly, "should be making sure that woman does not leave this airport." Rick looked at David for the first time. Really looked at him. Something about the way this man carried himself, the way the air around him seemed to reorganize itself, made Rick choose his next words very carefully. "Sir, are you the child's father?" "I am." "Can I get your name for our incident report, David Thompson?" Rick wrote it down. Then he stopped writing. His pen hovered over the clipboard. He looked up. "David Thompson." He repeated, "Meridian Holdings." David didn't respond. He didn't need to. The recognition on Rick's face was answer enough. Rick's complexion went from red to white in about 3 seconds. He pulled out his phone and turned away. David could hear him whispering urgently into it. The words Meridian and CEO and his son and oh God floated back in fragments. The paramedics lifted Marcus onto a small stretcher. Marcus was calmer now, the gauze pressed against his face, his eyes locked on his father. David walked beside the stretcher, his hand on Marcus's shoulder. As they passed Sandra, David stopped. He didn't look at her. He spoke to the air in front of him, but every word was meant for her. "You are going to remember this day for the rest of your life," he said, "and so is my son. The difference is, I'm going to make sure his memory ends with justice. Yours is going to end with consequences." He kept walking. Sandra watched them go. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were shaking. But she still believed she could survive this. She still believed the system would protect her. 12 years a union her word against a child's. She'd seen colleagues survive worse. She just had to stick to her story. She had no idea that the story was already over. At 6:22 p.m., 45 minutes after the phone call on the jetway, James Calloway, Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Holdings, sent a single email to the leasing division. The subject line read, "Immediate suspension of all active and pending contracts with Delta National Airlines effective immediately." The email was 4 sentences long. It referenced breach of duty of care, potential criminal liability exposure, and contractual morality clauses that Delta National had agreed to when they signed their fleet leasing agreements with Meridian 3 years ago. Within the hour, 63 aircraft operated by Delta National under Meridian leases were flagged for immediate return to lesser review. This didn't mean the plane stopped flying that night. Leasing contracts have timelines and legal frameworks, but it meant that Delta National's legal department received a notification that their largest fleet partner was initiating a full contract review, which in aviation finance is the equivalent of a doctor telling you they found something on your scan and they need to run more tests. It's not the death sentence. It's the moment you realize the death sentence is possible. At 6:41 p.m., David sat in the emergency room at Lurie Children's Hospital while a pediatric ENT specialist examined Marcus's nose. The X-ray confirmed a displaced nasal fracture. Marcus would need a closed reduction procedure, which meant a doctor would have to manually realign the bones. It would be done under light sedation, but it would hurt afterward. Marcus would have bruising and swelling for weeks. He was 8 years old and his face had been broken by a woman whose job was to keep him safe. David held the X-ray up to the light and stared at the thin white line running across the bridge of his son's nose. He stared at it for a long time. Then he called his attorney. Raymond David said, "I need you at Lurie Children's Hospital within the hour. Bring Angela from litigation, bring the media team, and bring everything we have on our contract structure with Delta National." "David, what happened?" "A flight attendant broke my son's nose." Silence on the other end. "Raymond, I'm already in the car." At 7:15 p.m., a nurse brought Marcus a popsicle and turned on cartoons. The sedation was scheduled for 8 o'clock. Marcus sat in the hospital bed looking impossibly small. The white sheets and the white walls and the white bandage across his face, making him look like he was disappearing into the room itself. David pulled a chair next to the bed and sat close. "Dad," Marcus said. "Yeah, buddy, am I in trouble?" David's throat tightened. He leaned forward. "Why would you be in trouble?" "Because I had an accident on the plane. I couldn't hold it. She wouldn't let me go to the bathroom and I couldn't hold it anymore. I'm sorry, Dad." David closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were red. "Marcus, listen to me. You are not in trouble. You did nothing wrong, not one single thing. What happened to you on that plane was not your fault. You understand me?" Marcus nodded slowly. "She was mean to me the whole time, Dad, from the very beginning. She was different with me than she was with everyone else. Tell me everything David said, from the moment you got on the plane." And Marcus told him all of it. The half-poured juice, the demand to clean the floor, the mockery, the refusal to let him use the bathroom, the words, "You people," the humiliation of wetting himself in front of an entire cabin, the borrowed sweatpants, the kick. David listened without interrupting. His face didn't change, but his right hand, the one Marcus couldn't see, was gripping the arm of the chair so hard the metal was bending under his fingers. When Marcus finished, David said, "You saved a cookie for me." Marcus's eyes brightened just slightly. "It's in my backpack. Miss Kesha gave me 2 from first class. I ate one, but I saved you one." David reached into the backpack and found the chocolate chip cookie wrapped carefully in a napkin, slightly crushed, still warm from being pressed against a book for 2 hours. He unwrapped it and took a bite. "Best cookie I ever had," David said. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. At 7:32 p.m., while Marcus watched cartoons and David sat beside him, pretending to be calm, Sandra Whitley was in the Delta National Crew Lounge at O'Hare, filling out an incident report. She wrote that the unaccompanied minor in seat 14C had been disruptive and non-compliant throughout the flight, that he had deliberately spilled a beverage, and that during deplaning, he had tripped on his own clothing and fallen, sustaining a minor facial injury. She did not mention the knee. She did not mention the bathroom. She did not mention anything that Dorothy or Kesha had witnessed. She signed the report, dated it, and submitted it to her supervisor. Then she changed out of her uniform, put on her street clothes, drove to her apartment in Schaumburg, poured a glass of white wine, and turned on the television. She felt confident, rattled, but confident. Kids got hurt on planes sometimes. It happened. The paperwork was filed. Her story was consistent. It would be fine. At 7:45 p.m., the first passenger video appeared online. A woman named Janelle Morris, who had been sitting in row 16, posted a 47-second clip to her social media. The video showed Sandra refusing to let Marcus use the bathroom. It captured Sandra's voice saying, "You people always want special treatment." It showed Marcus squirming in his seat, his face twisted with desperation. It showed Dorothy's voice from off-camera saying, "For God's sake, let the child use the restroom." Danelle's caption read, "This flight attendant on my Delta National flight just tortured an 8-year-old black child for 2 hours. She refused to let him use the bathroom until he wet himself. Then she kicked him in the jetway and broke his nose. I am shaking." This child was traveling alone. His name is Marcus. Someone find his parents. Within 30 minutes, the video had 40,000 views. Within 90 minutes, it had 400,000. By midnight, it would have 6 million. At 8:05 p.m., Marcus went under light sedation. A doctor named Patricia Kwan carefully realigned the bones in his nose. David stood in the corner of the room watching and did not look away once. When the procedure was finished and Marcus was resting, Dr. Kwan approached David. The reduction went well. The bones are realigned. But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Thompson. Your son has a lot of soft tissue damage. The swelling is significant. He's going to have 2 black eyes by tomorrow morning. There's also bruising on his lower back, consistent with blunt force trauma. Consistent with being kicked, David said. Dr. Kwan paused. I'm required to report injuries like this when the mechanism doesn't match the stated cause. A trip and fall wouldn't produce both facial fractures and lumbar bruising in this pattern. I've already contacted Child Protective Services as a precaution, Good David said. And I'd like a full copy of all medical records and imaging. Of course. At 8:20 p.m., Raymond Price, David's personal attorney, arrived at the hospital with Angela Wu, head of litigation at Meridian's legal division. Raymond was 62 years old, silver-haired, and had a face like a disappointed judge. Angela was 40 sharp and had never lost a case she cared about. David met them in the hospital corridor. Tell me, Raymond said. David told them everything. He showed them Marcus asleep in the bed, his small face bandaged bruises already darkening beneath his eyes. Angela stared at the sleeping boy for a long moment. Then she turned to David and said, I want to bury them. I'm not looking for a burial, David said. I'm looking for accountability. Sometimes those are the same thing, Angela said. What's our legal position? David asked Raymond. Raymond pulled out a tablet and opened a file. Strong, very strong. You have an eyewitness in the flight attendant named Keisha Williams who saw the assault directly. You have security camera footage from the jetway that the airport is legally required to preserve. You have passenger video that's already going viral online. You have medical documentation of injuries inconsistent with a fall, and you have the incident report filed by Sandra Whitley, which I guarantee will contradict the video evidence, which means she's now also committed fraud and filed a false report. And the contract side, David said. Raymond looked at Angela. Angela spoke. Every leasing agreement Meridian has with Delta National contains a morality clause and a duty of care provision. Section 14. B specifically states that any act of violence, discrimination, or criminal conduct by airline personnel that involves a passenger traveling under Meridian's corporate accounts or family accounts triggers an automatic review and potential termination of all active contracts. Marcus was flying under your family account. The clause applies. David nodded slowly. I made the call to freeze contracts within minutes of seeing Marcus. That was a motion. I need to know if it holds legally. It holds. Angela said Section 14B gives you the right to suspend pending full investigation. And here's the part that's going to really hurt them. Delta National's fleet is 42% Meridian-leased aircraft. If we don't just freeze but terminate, they lose nearly half their operational capacity. They can't replace those planes quickly. Other lessors will think twice about filling the gap once they see why we pulled out. This doesn't just hurt them financially, it threatens their ability to operate as an airline. David looked at the door to Marcus's room. I don't want to destroy an airline. Thousands of people work there who had nothing to do with what happened to my son. Then what do you want? Raymond asked. David was quiet for a moment. I want Sandra Whitley held accountable criminally. I want the system that enabled her held accountable institutionally. I want every unaccompanied minor who flies on any airline in this country to be safer tomorrow than they were today. And I want my son to know that when someone hurts you, you don't just accept it. You stand up, not with anger, with power. Raymond and Angela exchanged a glance. We can do all of that, Angela said. At 9:14 p.m., Sandra Whitley's phone buzzed. It was a text from a coworker. It contained a link to Janelle Morris's video, which now had over 1 million views. The text said, Sandra, is this you? Or you need to call the union right now. Sandra watched the video. Her wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. She could hear her own voice on the recording, clear and unmistakable, saying, You people always want special treatment. She could see herself standing over Marcus, refusing, denying, dismissing. She called her union representative, no answer. She called her supervisor, no answer. She called 3 colleagues, none of them picked up. At 9:31 p.m., she finally got a call back. It was from Delta National's head of human resources. The woman's voice was tight and professional. Sandra, this is Catherine Moore from HR. I need you to come to the corporate offices tomorrow morning at 700 a.m. I can explain. Sandra said the video doesn't show the full context. Sandra, I need you to not make any public statements. I need you to not post anything on social media. I need you to not speak to any media. And I need you at the office at 7 a.m. Am I being fired? Silence. Catherine, am I being fired? 7 a.m. Sandra, bring your union representative. The line went dead. Sandra stood in her kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and spilled wine, and the sound of her own voice playing on a loop from her phone screen, where the video was still running. She watched herself deny a child the bathroom. She watched herself mock him. She listened to herself say those 2 words that she would never be able to take back. She still didn't know about the phone call David had made. She still didn't know about the contracts. She still didn't know that Meridian Holdings was the financial architecture holding Delta National's fleet together. She didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that 6 million people were watching a video of the worst thing she'd ever done. And by morning, she was going to walk into a room where people who had protected her for 12 years were going to decide whether she was worth protecting anymore. At 10:17 p.m., David Thompson sat in a dark hospital room watching his son sleep. Marcus' face was swollen purple and blue, creeping under both eyes, the white bandage across his nose stark against his dark skin. His breathing was steady but congested, the sound of air moving through damaged cartilage. David's phone had been vibrating nonstop for hours. Board members' media requests his ex-wife, Marcus's mother, who was on a flight from Los Angeles and would land at midnight, furious and terrified. His COO, James, confirming that all contract suspensions were in place. His PR director asking for a statement. David ignored them all. He sat in the dark and watched his son breathe and thought about a question Marcus had asked him 2 years ago. They had been walking through downtown Chicago and a man on the street had said something ugly to them, something racial, something that Marcus was old enough to hear but too young to fully understand. Marcus had asked, "Dad, why did that man not like us?" David had knelt down on the sidewalk right there in the middle of the city and said, "Some people are afraid of things they don't understand, Marcus, and when people are afraid, they get mean. It's not about us. It's about them." "But what do we do?" Marcus had asked. "We be better," David had said. "We be smarter. We be stronger. And we never ever let anyone make us smaller than we are." Now David sat in that hospital room and wondered if he had lied to his son, because being better and smarter and stronger hadn't protected Marcus on that plane. Being polite hadn't protected him. Saying yes, ma'am, and please and thank you hadn't protected him. Following every rule and doing everything right hadn't protected him. An 8-year-old boy had done everything right and still ended up with a broken face. David picked up his phone. He opened his text messages and typed one line to Angela Wu. "Don't just freeze them. Start the termination process." Angela replied in 11 seconds. "Already drafted. Filing at midnight." David put the phone down. He reached over and pulled the blanket up to Marcus's chin, careful not to touch his face. Marcus stirred slightly and mumbled something in his sleep that sounded like cookie. David closed his eyes. A single tear ran down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, the way men do when they think no one's watching. But the nurse standing in the doorway saw it, and she turned away to give him privacy, because some moments don't belong to anyone except a father and his son. At 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before midnight, Delta National Airlines legal department received a formal notice of contract termination from Meridian Holdings. The document was 47 pages long. It cited Section 14B, the morality clause, the duty of care provision, the assault of a minor traveling under a Meridian family account, and the fraudulent incident report filed by a crew member. It demanded the return of all 63 leased aircraft within 90 days. It calculated early termination penalties at $214 million, and it included as Exhibit A photograph of Marcus Thompson's broken face. The night duty attorney at Delta National read the notice, read it again, picked up the phone, and called the airline's CEO at home. It was 12:03 a.m. when the CEO's phone rang. He answered on the second ring, and the first words the attorney said were, "Sir, we have a very serious problem." Richard Hale had been CEO of Delta National Airlines for 9 years. He had survived fuel crisis labor strikes, a pandemic, and 2 hostile takeover attempts. He had never in all those years been woken up by a phone call that made his hands shake. Until now. "Say that again," Richard said into the phone sitting up in bed. Meridian Holdings has filed a formal termination notice on all 63 leased aircraft, $214 million in early termination penalties. The morality clause, SUR Section 14B, over what a flight attendant assaulted an unaccompanied minor on Flight 2714 this afternoon. The child's father is David Thompson. Richard didn't speak for 5 full seconds. His wife rolled over and murmured something. He was already out of bed, walking to his home office, closing the door behind him. "David Thompson," Richard said. "Meridian Holdings. David Thompson." "Yes, sir. The David Thompson, whose company leases 42% of our operational fleet. Yes, sir." Richard sat down at his desk and pulled up his laptop. "Get me Catherine Moore. Get me our head of legal. Get me our chief operations officer. I want everyone in the boardroom at 6 a.m. Not 7, 6. Sir, there's more. There's a video. What video? A passenger recorded the flight attendant during the flight. It's already been viewed over 8 million times. It's on every major platform. Media outlets are picking it up. Richard typed his airline's name into a search engine. The first result was the video. The second result was an article with the headline, Delta National Flight Attendant Caught on Camera Denying Black Child Bathroom, Breaking His Nose. The third result was a trending hashtag with Marcus's name in it. How bad is the video? Richard asked, although he was already clicking play. 47 seconds later, he had his answer. Get everyone there at 5, Richard said. Not 6:5. He hung up and watched the video again. Then a third time, Sandra Whitley's voice saying, You people, played through his laptop speakers in the dark of his home office, and each time he heard it, he felt the ground beneath his airline shift a little more. At 12:31 a.m., Marcus's mother landed at O'Hare. Her name was Denise Palmer. She and David had divorced 3 years ago, but they co-parented with the kind of fierce mutual respect that only comes from two people who disagree on almost everything except one thing. Their son matters more than anything else in the world. Denise didn't go to baggage claim. She didn't stop for anything. She walked off the plane through the terminal out to the rideshare pickup and was at Lurie Children's Hospital by 1:15 a.m. She walked into Marcus's room and stopped in the doorway. David stood up from the chair beside the bed. He didn't say anything. He just stepped aside so she could see. Marcus was asleep. Both eyes were swollen, nearly shut. Deep purple bruising spreading across his cheekbones. The bandage across his nose was white against his dark skin. He looked smaller than 8. He looked fragile, in a way that Denise had never seen him look, not even when he was a baby. Denise pressed both hands against her mouth. A sound came out of her that was not a word. It was the sound a mother makes when something has happened to her child that she cannot undo. She crossed the room and lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, moving so gently it was like she was afraid the mattress would break. She touched Marcus's hand, then his forehead. Then she leaned down and pressed her lips against his temple, careful to avoid the bruising. "My baby," she whispered. "My baby boy." David had stood by the window. He gave her the moment. He owed her that. After a long time, Denise looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "Tell me everything," she said, "and don't leave anything out." David had told her every detail: the juice, the floor, the bathroom, the humiliation, the kick, the broken nose, the phone call, he'd made the contracts, he'd frozen the termination notice filed at midnight. Denise listened without moving. When he finished, she said one thing: "I want her arrested." "Raymond is filing a criminal complaint in the morning," David said. "Assault on a minor. Angela's handling the civil side." "I don't care about civil. I don't care about lawsuits and money and contracts, David. I want that woman in handcuffs. She put her hands on my child. She kicked my son in the back. She broke his face. I want her in a cell. She will be," David said. "Promise me. I promise." Denise looked back at Marcus. She stroked his hand with her thumb, tracing small circles on his skin. "He saved you a cookie," David said quietly. Denise's composure broke. She pressed her face into the blanket beside Marcus's arm and cried silently, her shoulders shaking while David stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through his own tears. At 5:02 a.m., Richard Hale sat at the head of a conference table, surrounded by 7 people who looked like they hadn't slept. Catherine Moore from HR Ben Alderman, Chief Legal Counsel. Thomas Reeves, Chief Operations Officer Sandra's direct supervisor, a man named Phil Tucker, the VP of Communications, Lisa Chang, the VP of Customer Experience, and a crisis management consultant who had been called at 3:00 a.m. and was charging $800 an hour. "Where are we?" Richard said. Lisa Chang spoke first. The video has crossed 22 million views across all platforms. Every major network has requested a statement. CNN is running the story at the top of the hour. The hashtag Justice for Marcus has been trending for 6 hours. We are the #1 story in the country right now. "Where's the flight attendant?" Catherine Moore answered. "Sandra Whitley is scheduled to arrive at 7. She was told to bring her union rep. Move it up. Get her here now. She's already on her way." Her union rep called at 4 a.m., asking for a preliminary meeting. Denied. "I want her in this room first." Richard turned to Ben Alderman. "Legal. What's our exposure?" Ben opened a folder that was already thick, significant. On the criminal side, we're looking at potential charges of assault on a minor child endangerment and possibly a hate crime enhancement, depending on how the prosecutor interprets the racial comments on video. That's her personal exposure. Our corporate exposure includes failure to protect an unaccompanied minor, negligent supervision, and potential violation of federal anti-discrimination statutes. If the DOT opens an investigation, and I believe they will, we could face fines up to $500,000 per incident. And the Meridian situation. Ben took a breath. That's the bigger problem. Meridian Holdings has filed formal termination on all 63 leased aircraft, citing the Section 14B morality clause. The penalty exposure is $214 million. But the real damage isn't the penalty. It's the fleet reduction. If Meridian pulls those planes, we lose 42% of our operational capacity. We cannot maintain our current route structure. We would have to cancel hundreds of flights per day. We would have to furlough thousands of employees. The stock market implications alone could cost us billions. The room was silent. Thomas Reeves, the COO, leaned forward. "Can we replace the Meridian aircraft with another lessor?" "Not quickly," Ben said. "Aviation leasing is a small world. Every major lessor will know why Meridian pulled out within hours. None of them will want to be the company that backfilled aircraft for an airline that let a flight attendant break a black child's nose. The optics are radioactive." Richard rubbed his face with both hands. "What does Thompson want?" "We don't know yet. His attorney filed the termination notice but hasn't made any demands. No calls, no counter, offers no communication at all. He's letting us bleed," Richard said. Nobody disagreed. Lisa Chang said, "I need to draft a public statement within the hour. The silence is killing us. Every minute we don't say something, the narrative gets worse." "What's the narrative right now?" Richard asked. "That we're a racist airline that abuses black children and then covers it up. That's the narrative, and it's hardening by the minute. Draft the statement, full accountability. Don't hedge. Don't use the word alleged. Don't say we take these matters seriously because the public is sick of hearing that. Say what happened. Say it was wrong. Say the employee has been terminated." Catherine Moore raised her hand slightly. "She hasn't been terminated yet. The union contract requires a hearing before," Catherine Richards said, and his voice had an edge that cut through the room. By the time that video hit 10 million views, her career at this airline was over. The hearing is a formality. Start the paperwork. And when she walks into this building, I want her badge, her credentials, and her keys. She does not represent this airline for one more second. Phil Tucker. Sandra's supervisor shifted in his chair. He hadn't spoken yet. Richard noticed. Phil Richards said, "You supervised her. Talk." Phil cleared his throat. "Sandra Whitley has been with us for 12 years. She has a clean disciplinary record. Does she officially? Yes." "What about unofficially?" Phil hesitated. This was the moment that would define whether he survived this or went down with Sandra. Everyone at the table knew it. He knew it. "There have been complaints," Phil said carefully, informal ones. Nothing that resulted in formal write-ups. "What kind of complaints?" "Passengers, mostly minority passengers. Complaints about attitude, dismissiveness, unequal treatment. A few crew members flagged concerns over the years. How many complaints I'd have to check the exact number?" "Guess." Phil swallowed. "Somewhere between 15 and 20 over the past 5 years. The crisis consultant, who had been silent until now, said, "That's going to come out. The media will file your internal records. They'll interview former crew members. If there are 15 to 20 prior complaints and this airline took no action, we're not looking at one rogue employee. We're looking at a systemic failure, and that changes everything." Richard stared at Phil. "You had 20 complaints about racial discrimination from a flight attendant, and you did nothing. They were informal, verbal. Most passengers didn't follow up with written complaints. The union. Don't blame the union for your failure to protect passengers on my airline." Phil's mouth closed. "You're suspended pending review," Richard said. "Effective now. Leave your badge with Catherine on your way out." Phil stood up slowly. His face was gray. He looked around the table, perhaps hoping someone would object, would defend him, would say this was too hasty. Nobody did. He walked out of the room and the door clicked shut behind him. At 6:09 a.m., Sandra Whitley walked into the Delta National corporate offices. She was dressed professionally, her hair pulled back, makeup careful. She had spent 2 hours getting ready, choosing her outfit like armor. Beside her was Gary Hoffman, her union representative, a thick-necked man who had been defending airline employees for 23 years. They were directed to a conference room on the 3rd floor. When they walked in, Catherine Moore was already seated with a folder in front of her and a recording device on the table. "Sandra, thank you for coming in." Catherine said, "Please sit down." Sandra sat. Gary sat beside her. Sat. He placed a legal pad on the table. "Before we begin," Gary said, "my client maintains that the injury to the minor was the result of an accidental fall during deplaning. She has filed an incident report consistent with this account." Catherine opened her folder. "Sandra, we've obtained the security camera footage from the jetway at gate B-17. Sandra's left hand twitched. "We've also obtained passenger video from the cabin during the flight." Sandra's breathing changed, and we have a written statement from crew member Kesha Williams, who was an eyewitness to the incident in the jetway. Gary put a hand on Sandra's arm. "My client would like to see the footage before making any further statements." Catherine turned the laptop on the table toward them and pressed play. The jetway camera showed everything. The angle was slightly elevated looking down the corridor. Sandra and Marcus walking. Marcus stumbling on his pants, and then with perfect clarity. Sandra's knee driving forward into the boy's back. Marcus launching forward, his face hitting the floor, his body crumpling, blood appearing beneath him almost instantly. Gary Hoffman had seen a lot of things in 23 years. He had defended employees who stole liquor from the cart. He had defended employees who cursed at passengers. He had defended employees who showed up drunk. He had negotiated settlements and plea deals and quiet resignations. He had never seen footage this clear and this damning. He leaned over to Sandra and whispered, "You told me he tripped." He did trip. The video makes it look Sandra stopped talking right now. Catherine paused the video. "Sandra, your incident report states that the child tripped on his clothing. This footage shows you making deliberate physical contact with the child's back, causing him to fall. Your incident report is inconsistent with the evidence." "I want to amend my report," Sandra said quickly. "It's too late to amend it. The original report has been preserved as evidence and has already been shared with law enforcement." Sandra's face drained of color. Law enforcement. The child's family has filed a criminal complaint. Chicago PD has been in contact with our legal department. Additionally, the FAA has been notified and the Department of Transportation has opened a preliminary inquiry. Gary leaned forward. "What is the airline's position?" Catherine closed the folder. Sandra Whitley is terminated from Delta National Airlines effective immediately. This termination is for cause based on assault of a minor passenger filing a fraudulent incident report violation of the airline's code of conduct and violation of federal anti-discrimination standards. "You can't terminate without a full hearing," Gary said. The Collective Bargaining Agreement Section 9. 4.4 of the CBA allows for immediate termination in cases involving violence against a passenger, particularly a minor. Our legal team has reviewed this. The termination stands. Sandra was shaking now, not her hands, her whole body. "My pension," she said. "I have 12 years. My pension. Pension matters will be handled through the standard separation process. You can't take my pension. I've been here 12 years. 12 years, Sandra Catherine said, and for the first time there was something almost human in her voice. You kicked a child. You broke an 8-year-old's nose. And then you lied about it in an official report. There is nothing I can do for you." Sandra stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. "This is because he's rich. This is because his father is some big CEO. If that kid was nobody, you wouldn't be doing this. You know that. You all know that, Sandra." Gary started. "No. If that kid was just some random kid, nobody would care. This is politics. This is money. This is them protecting themselves because they're scared of a lawsuit." Catherine stood as well. "Sandra, I need your badge, your airport credentials, and your uniform access card." Sandra stared at her. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her badge, and slammed it on the table so hard the recording device jumped. 12 years, she said. "I gave 12 years to this airline." "And in 2 seconds you destroyed a child's face," Catherine said quietly. "Please collect your personal belongings from the crew lounge. Security will escort you." Sandra walked out. Gary followed already on his phone calling a defense attorney. At 6:44 a.m., Sandra passed through the employee corridor toward the crew lounge. 2 security guards walked behind her. She kept her head down. She could feel other employees watching her from doorways and break rooms. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody made eye contact. She packed her things from her locker in 4 minutes. A spare pair of shoes, a coffee mug, 3 photos taped to the inside of the locker door, pictures of her family, her niece, her dog. She peeled them off one by one and put them in a plastic bag. As she was closing the locker, she heard her name. She turned. Kesha Williams was standing at the end of the row. They looked at each other across 20 feet of linoleum. "I want you to know something," Kesha said. "I didn't want it to go like this. I reported what I saw because it was the truth, but I didn't want it to go like this." Sandra's eyes were red. Her voice was raw. "You ruined my life." "No," Kesha said. "You ruined a little boy's face. I just didn't look away." Sandra had nothing left to say. She picked up her plastic bag, turned, and walked out between the 2 security guards. She didn't look back. At 7:12 a.m., David Thompson's phone rang in Marcus's hospital room. Marcus was awake eating Jell-O, watching cartoons. Denise was beside him, braiding his hair gently, whispering to him. David stepped into the hallway. "David, it's Angela. 2 developments. First, Delta National has terminated Sandra Whitley, effective immediately. Second, and this is significant, Chicago PD has issued a warrant for her arrest. Assault of a minor. She's going to be taken into custody today. What about the airline itself? Their CEO tried to call you directly at 6:30. I intercepted it. He wants a meeting. He's desperate to negotiate the contract termination. I told his office we would consider a meeting after the criminal process is underway and not before." "Good." "David, there's a third thing. The video. It's at 31 million views. Every major network is running the story. I've had 14 requests for interviews with you and Marcus. Time magazine wants a cover story. The NAACP has issued a statement. 3 members of Congress have made public comments calling for a federal investigation." David leaned against the hospital wall and closed his eyes. "David, are you there? I'm here. I just need a minute." "Of course." David stood in that hallway and thought about what he wanted. Not as a CEO, not as a litigant, not as a public figure, as a father. What did he want for his son? He wanted Marcus to never feel afraid on an airplane again. He wanted Marcus to know that the world, despite what had happened to him, was not a place where cruelty wins. He wanted Marcus to grow up and look back on this moment not as the time he was broken, but as the time his father stood up. Angela David said, "Set up a press conference for tomorrow morning." "Not today, tomorrow. I want Marcus to be released from the hospital first. I want him standing next to me. Are you sure his face is still? I know what his face looks like. That's exactly why I want him there. The world needs to see what she did. Not in a video on a phone in person standing in front of cameras. Let them look at an 8-year-old boy with 2 black eyes and a broken nose, and then tell me this is acceptable. Angela was quiet for a moment. I'll set it up. David walked back into Marcus's room. Marcus was laughing at something on the cartoon. Even with his face swollen and purple, even with bandages and bruises, he was laughing. Because he was 8 years old and cartoons were still funny, and his mother was beside him, and his father was in the doorway. And for just this one moment, the world was small enough to feel safe. Denise looked up at David. She saw something in his face. "What happened?" she asked. "They arrested her," David said. "She's going to be charged." Denise closed her eyes. Her hand found Marcus's and squeezed. "Dad," Marcus said, turning from the TV. "Yeah, buddy. When can I go home?" "Tomorrow, son. You're going home tomorrow." Marcus smiled. It was lopsided because of the swelling. It was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. At 8:45 a.m., Sandra Whitley was arrested at her apartment in Schaumburg by 2 Chicago PD detectives. She opened the door in sweatpants and a T-shirt. Her hair uncombed, her eyes swollen from crying. The detectives were polite and professional. They read her rights. They put her in handcuffs gently, the way you cuff someone who isn't a flight risk but who has a warrant and a viral video and a nation watching. Sandra didn't resist. She didn't speak. She walked to the unmarked car with her head down and got in the back seat, and the door closed, and the car pulled away from the curb of the apartment complex where she had lived for 7 years, and 3 of her neighbors watched from their windows, and not one of them was surprised. At 9:17 a.m., her booking photo was taken at the Cook County Processing Center. By 9:42, it was on every news site in America. By 10:05, it was being compared side by side with the photo of Marcus's bruised face that David's legal team had released with his permission. The contrast was devastating. A grown woman, eyes downcast, in a booking photo, and beside her, an 8-year-old boy with 2 black eyes, a shattered nose, and a bandage across his face, looking directly at the camera with an expression that wasn't anger or sadness, but something worse. It was the look of a child who had learned at 8 years old that the world could hurt you for no reason at all. That image would become the most shared photograph in the country for the next 72 hours. It would be printed on protest signs. It would appear on the cover of newspapers. It would be projected on screens at rallies and town halls and congressional hearings. And it would follow Sandra Whitley for the rest of her life. A mirror she could never put down, reflecting back the moment she chose cruelty over decency, power over compassion, prejudice over humanity. At 10:28 a.m., David Thompson sat in the hospital cafeteria drinking coffee that tasted like nothing. Raymond Price sat across from him with a stack of documents. Delta National stock dropped 11% at market open, Raymond said. Their CEO has called 4 times. Their board is in emergency session. Let them sit in it. David said, "David, at some point we need to engage. If we terminate the full contract, they could file for bankruptcy protection. That affects 23,000 employees." I know. Innocent people, baggage handlers, gate agents, mechanics, people who had nothing to do with what happened to Marcus. David wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I know that too, Raymond. You think I haven't thought about that? I think you're a father in pain, and you have the power to bring down an empire. And I want to make sure the empire falls on the right people. David looked at him. Raymond was one of the few people in the world who could talk to David like that. 30 years of friendship bought that kind of honesty. "What are you suggesting?" David asked. "I'm suggesting we give them a path. Not an easy one, not a comfortable one, but a path. Conditions for reinstating the contracts, real conditions, ones that force structural change, like what mandatory anti-discrimination training independent oversight board, a complete overhaul of their unaccompanied minor protocols, a public apology, not from a PR team, from their CEO on camera to Marcus directly." A $50 million fund for passenger advocacy and child safety and the personal criminal prosecution of Sandra Whitley proceeds without any interference or settlement from the airline. David stared into his coffee. And if they refuse, then we terminate, and they deal with the consequences. Draw it up, David said. But Raymond, don't make it easy to say yes. Make it just barely possible. I want them to feel every single word. Raymond nodded and left the cafeteria. David sat alone with his cold coffee and his phone, buzzing with messages from a world that suddenly cared very much about an 8-year-old boy on an airplane. He opened his text messages. There was one from Marcus sent from Denise's phone. It was a photo of Marcus in his hospital bed, giving a thumbs up with one hand while holding the remaining half of the chocolate chip cookie in the other. Underneath, in the unsteady typing of an 8-year-old, it said, "Dad, I saved you the last bite. David Thompson, CEO of a $2. $7 billion corporation, a man who had negotiated deals with sovereign nations and stared down hostile boards and built an empire from nothing, put his phone face down on the cafeteria table and pressed both hands against his eyes and wept." The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. the following morning at the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Chicago. Angela Wu had chosen the location deliberately. Not a hospital, not a courthouse, not Meridian's corporate offices, a neutral space, elegant but not ostentatious, a place that said power without screaming it. David arrived at 8:30 with Marcus and Denise. Marcus was wearing a navy blue suit that Denise had bought the evening before, sized perfectly with a white shirt and no tie because he was 8 and ties were uncomfortable. And Denise had said he's been through enough without choking him. His face was still swollen. Both eyes were ringed with deep purple bruising that had yellowed at the edges. The bandage across his nose was smaller now, replaced by thin surgical tape, but the damage was visible from across any room. He looked exactly like what he was, a child who had been hurt by an adult. David knelt in front of Marcus in the hotel suite before they went downstairs. "You don't have to do this," David said. "If you want to stay up here with Mom, that's okay. Nobody will think less of you." Marcus looked at his father. "Will it help other kids?" David paused. "What do you mean? If I go down there and people see my face, will it help? So this doesn't happen to other kids on airplanes?" David's chest tightened. "Yes, I think it will. Then I want to go." Denise put her hand on Marcus's shoulder from behind. David could see her fingers trembling, but her voice was steady when she said, "That's my boy." They walked downstairs together, the three of them, a family that had been broken apart by divorce, but was welded together by something stronger than marriage. They walked into that room as a unit, and every camera in the place started firing the moment the door opened. The room was packed. Over 100 journalists, 30 cameras, network correspondents, David recognized from television. The noise level dropped to near silence when Marcus walked in. Every lens in the room found his face, the bruises, the tape, the swelling, the small allness of him against the bigness of everything around him. David approached the podium. Denise stood to his left. Marcus stood to his right, holding his mother's hand. David did not read from notes. He did not use a teleprompter. He looked directly into the cameras and spoke. 2 days ago, my son Marcus boarded a flight as an unaccompanied minor. He was polite. He was quiet. He followed every rule. He said please and thank you and yes, ma'am to every adult he encountered. And in return, a flight attendant named Sandra Whitley denied him basic human dignity. She mocked him. She refused to let him use the bathroom until he wet himself in his seat. And then, in the jetway after the flight, she kicked him in the back so hard that he fell face first onto the floor and broke his nose. David paused. The room was absolutely silent. My son is 8 years old. He weighs 62 pounds. He was alone on that airplane. The one person whose job it was to keep him safe chose instead to humiliate him, degrade him, and physically assault him. And when it was over, she filed a report saying he tripped. David looked down at Marcus. Marcus looked up at him. Their eyes met and something passed between them that no camera could capture. I am not here today as the CEO of Meridian Holdings. I am here as Marcus's father, and I am here to say that what happened to my son is not an isolated incident. It is not a one-time lapse in judgment. It is the product of a system that allows prejudice to wear a uniform and authority to become abuse. My son was targeted because of the color of his skin. That is not speculation. It is on video. You've all seen it. 35 million of you have seen it. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. David ignored her and continued. I have taken action against Delta National Airlines through my company, Meridian Holdings. Those actions will continue until I am satisfied that structural changes have been made to ensure that no child of any color on any flight is ever treated the way my son was treated. I am also pursuing full criminal prosecution of Sandra Whitley. She has been charged with assault of a minor. I intend to see that charge through to its conclusion. David stepped back from the podium. Then he did something that Angela Wu had advised against, that Raymond Price had cautioned him not to do, that every PR professional in the country would have said was too risky, too emotional, too uncontrolled. He picked up his son. He lifted Marcus onto his hip the way you carry a toddler. Except Marcus was 8 and his legs dangled, and he was almost too big for it, but not quite. Marcus wrapped his arms around his father's neck and pressed his bruised face against David's shoulder. David looked at the cameras. This is what she did to my child. Look at him. Look at his face. And then ask yourself, if this were your son, what would you do? He carried Marcus out of the room. Denise followed. The door closed behind them, and for 3 full seconds, a room full of journalists who were paid to talk for a living said absolutely nothing. Then the room erupted. At 11:07 a.m., the press conference footage hit every network simultaneously. By noon, it had been viewed 60 million times. The image of David holding Marcus, the boy's bruised face pressed against his father's shoulder, became the defining photograph of the year. It was on the front page of every newspaper in the country by the next morning. It would win a Pulitzer Prize for the photographer who captured it, a 26-year-old freelancer named Maria Santos, who'd been standing in the second row and whose hands had been shaking so badly she almost didn't get the shot. At 12:15 p.m., Delta National Airlines held their own press conference. Richard Hale stood at a podium with the airline's logo behind him. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 48 hours. On behalf of Delta National Airlines, I want to offer our deepest and most sincere apology to Marcus Thompson and his family. What occurred on Flight 2714 was inexcusable. It was a violation of everything this airline stands for. The employee responsible has been terminated and is facing criminal charges. We fully support the legal process and will cooperate completely with all investigations. A reporter shouted from the crowd, Mr. Hale, are you aware that Sandra Whitley had over 15 prior complaints of discriminatory behavior and that no action was taken? Richard gripped the podium. We are conducting a full internal review of all complaint records and supervisory protocols. Any failures in our system of accountability will be identified and corrected. Is it true that Meridian Holdings has terminated your fleet leasing contracts? We are in communication with Meridian Holdings regarding our business relationship. I'm not able to comment on the specifics at this time. Your stock has dropped 19% in 2 days. How do you respond to shareholders who are calling for your resignation? Richard Hale looked directly at the camera. For a moment, the corporate mask slipped, and underneath it was a man who knew he was standing on a ledge. I respond by saying that the safety and dignity of every passenger on our aircraft is my personal responsibility. I failed in that responsibility, and I will do whatever it takes to earn back the trust of the public, our passengers, and our partners. He walked away from the podium without taking another question. Lisa Chang, the VP of Communications, watched him go and knew in that moment that Richard Hale would not be CEO of Delta National Airlines by the end of the month. At 1:45 p.m., Dorothy Henderson, the 73-year-old woman who had been sitting next to Marcus on the flight, gave an interview to a national morning show from her living room in Evanston, Illinois. She had been contacted by over 30 media outlets in 2 days. She chose the one her granddaughter watched. "I knew something was wrong the moment that woman looked at that child," Dorothy said. "It was in her eyes. She had already decided who he was before he opened his mouth. He said, 'Please.' He said, 'Thank you.' He called her ma'am, and she treated him like dirt, like he was less than nothing." Mrs. Henderson, you recorded part of the incident on your phone. What made you decide to do that? "Because I'm 73 years old and I've seen this before. I grew up in Mississippi. I know what it looks like when someone decides a person doesn't deserve basic respect because of the color of their skin. I couldn't stop what was happening. I'm an old woman with bad knees, but I could make sure someone saw it. So I recorded." "What would you say to Sandra Whitley if she were here right now?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "I'd say you looked at a little boy and you saw a problem. I looked at the same little boy and I saw my grandson. That's the difference between us. And that difference cost a child his sense of safety." The interview was watched by 14 million people. Dorothy Henderson received over 6,000 letters in the following weeks. She read every single one. At 3:22 p.m., Angela Wu called David with an update. Delta National wants to negotiate. Their board has authorized Richard Hale to accept conditions for contract reinstatement. They're sending their legal team to our offices tomorrow morning. Did you send them our terms? I did. All of them. The $50 million fund, the independent oversight board, the protocol overhaul the public apology to Marcus everything. And their initial response was that the $50 million was too high and the independent oversight board was too invasive. Then we have nothing to talk about. David, wait. That was their initial response. 2 hours later, after their stock dropped another 4%, they called back and said they were willing to discuss all terms without preconditions. David was sitting in the hospital room. Marcus had been cleared for discharge and Denise was packing his things. Marcus was standing by the window looking out at the city wearing his little navy suit with the jacket unbuttoned. "Schedule the meeting," David said. "But Angela, I meant what I said. I want them to feel every word. They will." At 4:00 p.m., Marcus was officially discharged from Lure Children's Hospital. A nurse named Tamara, who had been on shift for both nights of his stay, knelt down and hugged him at the elevator. "You're the bravest kid I've ever met," Tamara said. Marcus hugged her back. "Thank you for taking care of me. You come visit me anytime, okay? I'll have Jell-O waiting." Marcus smiled his lopsided smile. The red kind, only the red kind. They walked out of the hospital, David on one side, Denise on the other, Marcus in the middle. There were photographers outside. David had expected that. He had his driver pull the car to a side entrance, but somehow they'd found it. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. Marcus flinched at the noise. David put his hand on the back of Marcus's head. "Eyes forward, buddy. Don't look at them. Just walk." Marcus walked. Eyes forward. Chin up. 62 pounds of courage in a navy blue suit. They got in the car. The door closed. The noise stopped. Marcus let out a breath. He'd been holding since the lobby. "Dad." "Yeah." "Are those people going to follow us for a little while, then they'll find something else to pay attention to? But what matters doesn't change. What matters is you and me and Mom. That's it." Marcus leaned his head against his father's arm. Within 2 minutes, he was asleep. At 6:30 p.m., David brought Marcus to his penthouse apartment on Lakeshore Drive. Denise came with them. They hadn't discussed the arrangement. She simply got in the car and came, and David didn't question it because their son needed both parents under the same roof tonight, and some things don't require a conversation. David carried Marcus inside and laid him on the couch. Denise took off his shoes and covered him with a blanket. They stood over him together, watching him sleep. "He asked me if his face would go back to normal," Denise said quietly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the swelling would go down and the bruises would fade." He said, "But will I look the same?" I didn't know what to say, David. How do you tell your child that a scar might stay? You tell him scars are proof that he survived something. That's what my grandmother used to say. Denise wiped her eyes. Your grandmother was tougher than both of us. Yes, she was. They sat in the kitchen while Marcus slept. Denise made tea because she needed something to do with her hands. David sat at the counter and opened his laptop. His inbox had over 2,000 unread emails. Board members, investors, media, politicians, strangers who had somehow found his email address to tell him they were praying for Marcus, or that they supported him, or that they had their own stories about their own children on airplanes. One email caught his eye. It was from Kesha Williams. The subject line read about Marcus. David opened it. Mr. Thompson. My name is Keisha Williams. I was the flight attendant who tried to help Marcus on Flight 2714. I want you to know that your son is one of the most polite and kind children I have ever encountered in my career. When I brought him cookies, he said thank you 3 times. When I helped him change his clothes, he apologized to me for the trouble. He should never have had to apologize for anything. I have given my full statement to the police and to the airline's investigators. I will testify in court if needed. I wanted to reach out to you personally because I need you to know that not everyone on that plane looked away. Some of us saw your son. Some of us tried. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. He deserved better than what he got. Sincerely, Kesha Williams. David read the email twice. Then he forwarded it to Raymond with one line. Make sure this woman doesn't lose her job over any of this, whatever it takes. Raymond responded in 4 minutes, already on it. She's been offered a promotion by the airline as part of their internal restructuring. She declined, said she didn't want anything that came from what happened to Marcus. She just wants to keep flying. David closed his laptop. He looked at the kitchen ceiling. He thought about Kesha Williams, 20-some years old, 18 months on the job, standing in a galley confronting a 12-year veteran who outranked her saying, "Move," with a voice that could cut steel, finding sweatpants for a humiliated child from God knows where in the middle of a flight. He picked up his phone and typed an email directly to Kesha. Kesha, this is David Thompson, Marcus's father. Thank you for what you did for my son. You didn't just try, you acted. In a situation where everyone else looked away or stayed silent, you stepped forward. That takes more courage than most adults will ever show in their entire lives. Marcus told me about the cookies. He told me you were kind to him when no one else was. He saved one of those cookies for me. I ate it in the hospital while he slept. It was the best thing I've ever tasted. If there is ever anything you need, anything at all, you have my number. You are part of our family's story now, and we don't forget the people who stood up for us. With gratitude, David, he sent it. Then he closed his laptop for real and went to check on his son. Marcus was still asleep on the couch. His breathing was steady, slightly congested from the swelling, a soft whistle on each exhale. His hands were tucked under his chin. The bruises on his face were darker in the dim light. David sat on the floor next to the couch and leaned his back against it. He could feel Marcus's warmth through the cushion. He closed his eyes. His phone buzzed. It was Angela. David, sorry to bother you. One more thing. Sandra Whitley's defense attorney has reached out to our team. He's exploring the possibility of a plea deal. He says Sandra is willing to plead guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for no jail time. David's eyes opened. No, I told him that would be your answer. She kicked my son in the back, Angela. She broke his face. She filed a false report to cover it up. She terrorized him for an entire flight because of the color of his skin, and now she wants to plead down and walk away. No, full charges, full trial, full consequences. Understood. There's one more thing. Her attorney also said Sandra wants to apologize to Marcus directly. David was quiet for a long time. David, she doesn't get to apologize to my son to make herself feel better. That's not how this works. An apology isn't a gift you give to the person you hurt. It's a debt you pay, and she hasn't even begun to pay. I'll convey that. The line went dead. David put his phone down and pressed the back of his head against the couch. From the kitchen doorway, Denise watched him. She had heard his half of the conversation. She walked over, sat on the floor next to him, and leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just breathing. Two parents on a floor, their backs against a couch, where their son slept, holding the weight of something that was bigger than both of them, and somehow still not bigger than the love they had for the small person behind them. At 9:51 p.m., Sandra Whitley sat in her attorney's office in downtown Chicago. The attorney's name was Michael Brandt. He was good, expensive, and completely honest about their situation. Sandra, I need you to understand where we are. The jetway footage is clear. The passenger video corroborates the pattern of behavior throughout the flight. You have an eyewitness and Kesha Williams who will testify against you. Your own incident report contradicts the physical evidence, which means the prosecution can add filing a false report to the charges. And the public sentiment is frankly the worst I've ever seen for a defendant in a case like this. What does that mean for me? It means a jury is going to see that video. They're going to see a white woman kick a black child in the back. They're going to see his broken face. They're going to hear your voice saying, "You people." And they're going to hear his father, a man the country is currently treating like a hero, describe what his son went through. Sandra, I am very good at my job, but I need you to be realistic about what we're facing. I tried to plead down. They said no. They said no because David Thompson isn't looking for a deal. He's looking for accountability, and he has the resources and the public support to get it. Sandra stared at her hands. They were in her lap, fingers, interlaced knuckles white. I've been flying for 12 years, she said. I've never hit a passenger before. Michael leaned forward. Sandra, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, because your answer determines our entire strategy. Did you kick that child deliberately, or was it an accident Sandra didn't answer for a long time? The clock on the wall ticked. Michael waited. I was frustrated, she said finally. He was slow. He was in my way. I was angry and tired, and I just wanted him off my plane. And my knee came forward. I don't know if I meant to do it or if it just happened, but I didn't try to stop it. I felt my knee hit his back, and I didn't even feel bad about it until he was on the ground bleeding. Michael sat back in his chair. He had been hoping for a different answer, an accident, a stumble, something he could work with. But what Sandra had just described was a woman who assaulted a child and didn't feel remorse until she saw the consequences. Sandra. Michael said carefully, you cannot say that on a witness stand. I know. We need a different approach. I'm going to recommend we focus on your emotional state, the stress of the job, the fatigue. We build a narrative around burnout and momentary loss of control. Is that going to work? Michael looked at her for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know, but it's the best we have. Sandra nodded slowly. She reached for her purse and pulled out her phone. The screen was filled with notifications, hundreds of messages, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Her social media accounts had been found and flooded with comments so vicious she had stopped reading them 12 hours ago. Michael. She said, I got an email this morning from my sister. She said she can't be associated with me right now because her company is getting pressure. My sister Michael, she won't talk to me. Michael said nothing. There was nothing to say. My neighbors won't look at me. The woman at the coffee shop this morning recognized me and refused to serve me. I can't leave my apartment without being photographed. My life is over. Your life isn't over, Sandra. Isn't it? Because it feels like it. It feels like everything I built for 12 years was demolished in 2 seconds on a jetway. 2 seconds that you chose, Michael said quietly. Sandra flinched. She looked at him, and for the first time, the defensiveness cracked. Underneath it was something raw, something that might have been the beginning of genuine reckoning. I hurt that little boy, she said. I really hurt him. Yes, you did. And all those things on the plane, the juice, the bathroom, the things I said, I told myself I was just doing my job enforcing the rules. But I wasn't. I was punishing him for something he didn't do, for something he couldn't control, for being black, Michael said. Not as an accusation, as a fact that needed to be said out loud in this room before it was said out loud in a courtroom. Sandra's face crumpled. I don't think of myself as a racist. Most people who do racist things don't. She put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. Michael pushed a box of tissues across the desk and waited. When she looked up, her mascara was streaked and her eyes were hollowed. And she looked for the first time since any of this started, like a person confronting the actual shape of what she had done. "What do I do?" she whispered. "You face it," Michael said. "You go to trial. You tell the truth, not the version you put in the incident report. The real truth, and you accept whatever comes. Will I go to prison? It's possible. Assault on a minor carries up to 5 years in Illinois. With the evidence against us, a conviction is likely. Sentencing will depend on the judge, your lack of prior criminal record, and whether the prosecution pushes for maximum." 5 years, Sandra said. The words came out hollow. "I will fight for the best possible outcome, but Sandra, I need you to prepare yourself, and I need you to understand something. The man whose son you hurt has the money, the lawyers, and the public behind him. He is not going to stop. He is not going to settle. And he is not going to forgive until justice is served, whatever that looks like to him." Sandra stood up. She gathered her purse. She walked to the door. Then she stopped and turned back. "That little boy," she said, "Marcus. He said please to me 11 times on that flight. I counted 11 times he said please, and I ignored every single one." She walked out of the office and into a world that had already decided who she was, and for the first time she was starting to agree with them. The trial began on a Monday in January, 3 months after Flight 2714, Cook County Courthouse Judge Patricia Owens presiding. The prosecution was led by Assistant State's Attorney Diana Reeves, a woman with 21 years of trial experience who had personally requested the case after watching the jetway footage. The defense was Michael Brandt, who had spent the past 3 months building the only strategy he had. Sandra Whitley was not a monster. She was a burned-out, overworked flight attendant who had a momentary loss of control. The jury was selected in 2 days, 7 women, 5 men, 3 black jurors, 2 Hispanic, 7 white. Michael Brandt had fought to exclude anyone who had seen the viral video, but Judge Owens ruled that media saturation made that impossible, and instead asked each juror whether they could set aside what they had seen and judge based solely on courtroom evidence. They all said yes. Whether that was true was another matter entirely. Diana Reeves gave her opening statement at 9:15 a.m. on the first day of testimony. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple. On October 14th, an 8-year-old boy named Marcus Thompson boarded a flight alone. He was polite. He was quiet. He followed every rule. And over the course of 2 hours, a flight attendant named Sandra Whitley systematically humiliated him, denied him basic human necessities, and ultimately kicked him so hard in the back that he fell face first onto a jetway floor and broke his nose. She then filed a false report claiming he tripped. The evidence will show you everything. The video will show you everything. And when you've seen it all, I am going to ask you to do one thing. Believe your own eyes." Michael Brandt stood up next. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at the jury for a long moment before speaking. "My client did something terrible. I'm not going to stand here and tell you she didn't. But I am going to ask you to understand how it happened. Sandra Whitley flew over 4,000 flights in 12 years. She worked 16-hour shifts. She dealt with abusive passengers' medical emergencies and the daily grinding pressure of an industry that treats its workers like replaceable parts. On October 14th, she was at the end of a 3-day rotation. She was exhausted, frustrated, and she lost control. What she did was wrong. It was criminal, and she will be held accountable. But she is not the villain the media has made her into. She is a human being who made the worst mistake of her life." Diana Reeves called her first witness at 10:02 a.m., Keisha Williams. Keisha took the stand in a simple black dress. Her hands were steady. Her voice was clear. Miss Williams, can you describe what you observed during Flight 2714 regarding the defendant's treatment of Marcus Thompson? Kesha took a breath. From the moment Marcus boarded, Sandra treated him differently than every other passenger. She was short with him. She was dismissive. When she served beverages, she poured his juice halfway and slammed it down. When turbulence knocked the cup over, she blamed him and demanded he clean the floor on his hands and knees. When he needed to use the bathroom during descent, she refused to let him go. She told him to hold it. He begged her. He said, "Please." And she stood over him and said, "You people always want special treatment. And did you witness the incident in the jetway I did?" I was walking approximately 15 feet behind Sandra and Marcus. Marcus stumbled on his pants. Before he could recover, Sandra drove her knee into his lower back. He went forward and down. His face hit the floor. I heard the impact. I saw the blood immediately. What did the defendant do after the child fell? Nothing. She stood there. She looked at him on the ground bleeding and she said, "He tripped." She didn't kneel down. She didn't call for help. She didn't touch him. She straightened her uniform and said, "He tripped." "Thank you, Miss Williams." Michael Brandt approached for cross-examination. "Miss Williams, isn't it possible that what you perceived as a deliberate kick was in fact an accidental collision? Miss Whitley was walking behind the child. He stumbled. Their paths crossed. Isn't that possible?" Keisha looked at him. "No, no. You're certain?" "I am certain." I watched her knee come forward. It was not a stumble. It was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of force against a child's body. I saw it with my own eyes, and I will never unsee it. Michael Brandt paused. He had expected more room to maneuver. He didn't get it. No further questions. The prosecution's second witness was Dorothy Henderson. She was wheeled to the stand in a wheelchair because her knees had gotten worse over the winter, but her mind was as sharp as a scalpel. "Mrs. Henderson, you were seated next to Marcus Thompson on Flight 2714. Can you describe his behavior during the flight?" "That boy was perfect," Dorothy said. "I've been flying for 50 years, and he was the best-behaved passenger I have ever sat next to, adult or child. He buckled his seatbelt without being told. He said, 'Please and thank you for everything.' He read his book quietly. He didn't fidget. He didn't complain. When the turbulence knocked his juice over, he apologized. He apologized for something that wasn't his fault, because that's the kind of child he is. And how did the defendant treat him?" Dorothy's eyes hardened like he was an inconvenience, like he was less than. She poured his juice halfway while giving full cups to everyone around him. She demanded he get on his hands and knees to clean a spill caused by turbulence. She refused to let him use the restroom. She called him "you people." She let him sit there and suffer until he wet himself because she couldn't be bothered to treat a black child like a human being. Objection. Michael Brandt said the witness is characterizing the defendant's motivations. Sustained. Mrs. Henderson, please describe what you observed rather than interpreting intent. Dorothy looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I'm 73 years old. I grew up in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1952. I have seen intent my entire life. I know exactly what it looks like." The courtroom stirred. Judge Owens paused. "The objection is sustained. Please continue with observable facts, Mrs. Henderson." Dorothy nodded, but the jury had heard her, and they would not unhear it. At 2:17 p.m., the prosecution played the jetway security footage. The courtroom was silent. On the screen, Sandra and Marcus walked up the corridor. Marcus stumbled. Sandra's knee drove forward. Marcus flew forward and down. His face hit the floor. His body went limp for a half second before he rolled to his side. Blood appeared immediately dark against the gray carpet. The video was 13 seconds long. Diana Reeves played it 3 times. 2 jurors in the front row looked away on the third viewing. 1 woman in the back row was crying. Sandra Whitley sat at the defense table and stared straight ahead. Her face was blank. Her attorney had told her not to show emotion during the footage, but her hands under the table were gripping the edge of her chair so hard, her fingernails left marks in the wood. At 3:40 p.m., Marcus Thompson was called to the stand. The courtroom shifted. Every head turned toward the door. Marcus walked in wearing a dark blue sweater and khaki pants. His nose had healed, but there was a slight crookedness to the bridge that hadn't been there before, a permanent reminder that would greet him in every mirror for the rest of his life. The bruises were gone, but Denise had told David just last week that Marcus still flinched when strangers raised their voices. He still held it when he needed to use the bathroom in public places. He still went quiet and still when someone looked at him with irritation. He was 8 years old and he carried the wound like a man 3 times his age. Marcus climbed into the witness chair. The chair was too big for him. His feet didn't touch the floor. Diana Reeves approached gently. "Marcus, I know this is hard. You just tell us the truth. Okay, that's all you have to do." "Yes, ma'am." "Can you tell us what happened when you got on the airplane that day?" Marcus folded his hands in his lap. "I got on the plane, and the lady took my paper and told me to find my seat. She didn't walk me there like they usually do. She just said, 'Go find it.' And what happened during the flight, she was mean to me. She gave me less juice than everyone else. When it spilled because of the bumps, she yelled at me and told me to clean it up with my shirt. Miss Dorothy told her she didn't have to do that, and the lady got mad at Miss Dorothy too." "What happened when you needed to use the bathroom?" Marcus's voice got quieter. "I pressed the button and she came and I said, 'I really had to go.' She said no. I asked again and she said no again. I told her I couldn't hold it anymore and she said, 'You people always want special treatment.' And then I couldn't hold it. I had an accident in my seat." Marcus stopped talking. He looked down at his hands. "Take your time, Marcus," Diana said. "I was really embarrassed," Marcus said. His voice cracked on the word embarrassed. Everyone could see. "And the lady, she smelled it and she looked at me like I was disgusting. Miss Keisha helped me. She gave me new pants and she was nice to me." "Marcus, what happened after the plane landed?" "The lady walked me off the plane in the tunnel thing. I tripped on my pants because they were too long and then she hit me from behind. I fell on my face. My nose broke. There was blood everywhere. When you say she hit, can you describe exactly what happened? Her knee went into my back hard like she pushed me, and I went down, and I couldn't stop myself, and my face hit the floor. What did she do after you fell?" "Nothing. She just stood there. She said I tripped, but I didn't trip. She kicked me. Well, what happened next? Miss Kesha came and helped me, and then the doctor people came, and then my dad came." Marcus's voice broke again. "I saw my dad and I just wanted him to hold me. That's all I wanted." The courtroom was devastatingly quiet. A juror in the second row pressed a tissue against her mouth. The court reporter's hands had stopped moving over the keys. Michael Brandt stood for cross-examination. He approached Marcus slowly, carefully, like a man walking through a minefield. "Marcus, I'm sorry for what you went through. I just have a couple of questions. When you stumbled in the jetway, is it possible that Ms. Whitley accidentally bumped into you because you stopped?" Suddenly, Marcus looked at him. "No, sir. I felt her knee push me. It wasn't an accident. She pushed me on purpose. How can you be sure? Because when someone bumps into you by accident, they say sorry. She didn't say sorry. She said I tripped." Michael Brandt had nothing to say to that. He stood there for a moment, then nodded. No further questions. Marcus stepped down from the stand. He walked past the defense table. He didn't look at Sandra, but Sandra looked at him. She watched this boy walk past her with his slightly crooked nose and his steady steps and his hands at his sides. And for the first time in the entire trial, her composure broke. She pressed her fist against her mouth and squeezed her eyes shut, and a single tear ran down her cheek. The jury saw it. They would discuss it later during deliberation. Half of them would call it guilt. The other half would call it self-pity. None of them would call it enough. David Thompson was the final witness for the prosecution. He took the stand at 4:52 p.m. He wore a dark gray suit, no tie. He looked like what he was, a father who had spent 3 months converting grief into action. "Mr. Thompson, can you describe the moment you saw your son after the flight? I was waiting at the gate." The jetway door opened and paramedics came through first. Then I saw Marcus on a stretcher. His face was covered in blood. His nose was pushed to the side. His eyes were wide open, and he was looking for me. He saw me, and he said, "Daddy, just that one word." And I went to him, and I held him, and his blood was on my shirt and my hands, and I could feel his body shaking against mine. What has been the impact on Marcus since the incident? David's jaw tightened. "My son is afraid of airplanes. He used to love flying. Now he won't go near an airport. He has nightmares. He wakes up crying and can't tell us why. He holds it when he needs to use the bathroom because he's afraid someone will say no. He flinches when adults raise their voices. He's 8 years old and he's already learned that the world can hurt him for no reason. That's not a lesson any child should learn. And he learned it from a woman whose job was to protect him. No further questions. Michael Brandt declined to cross-examine. There was nothing to gain and everything to lose from questioning a father about his son's pain. Closing arguments were the next morning. Diana Reeves stood before the jury one final time. You've seen the video. You've heard from the witnesses. You've heard from Marcus himself. This is not a complicated case. A grown woman assaulted a child. She broke his nose. She lied about it. She did it because she could. Because she had authority and he had none because he was small and black and alone. And she thought no one was watching. But someone was always watching. Dorothy was watching. Kesha was watching. The cameras were watching. And now you are watching. Marcus Thompson said please. 11 times on that flight. 11 times. He did everything right. And it wasn't enough. So now I'm asking you to do what's right. Find Sandra Whitley guilty. Not for revenge, not for politics. For an 8-year-old boy who said please 11 times and got a broken nose in return. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 47 minutes. They returned at 2:12 p.m. The 4 persons stood. Judge Owens asked for the verdict. On the charge of assault of a minor, we the jury find the defendant Sandra Whitley guilty. Sandra's head dropped. Michael Brandt put his hand on her shoulder. Sandra pressed both palms flat against the defense table and stared at the wood grain and breathed in short, shallow gasps. In the gallery, Denise grabbed David's hand and squeezed until her knuckles went white. David didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his eyes on the judge, his face carved from stone. Marcus wasn't in the courtroom. He was at home with Denise's mother playing chess on the living room floor. He would learn the verdict from his parents that evening. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Owens addressed Sandra directly. Miss Whitley, you were entrusted with the care of a child. You violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible. You assaulted him. You humiliated him, and then you lied about it. The court has considered your clean prior record and your years of service. The court has also considered the severity of your actions, the vulnerability of your victim, and the overwhelming evidence of racial bias in your treatment of this child. I sentence you to 3 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. Sandra stood motionless as the bailio approached. She held out her hands. The cuffs clicked shut. She was let out through the side door without looking back. Outside the courthouse, David held a brief statement. No podium this time, just a father standing on the steps with his ex-wife beside him. Today, a jury and a judge held Sandra Whitley accountable for what she did to our son. We are grateful for the justice system, for the witnesses who came forward, and for the millions of people who supported Marcus. But this isn't the end. This is the beginning. 2 weeks after sentencing, David and Angela Wu finalized the agreement with Delta National Airlines. Richard Hale had resigned as CEO the week before the trial ended. His replacement, a woman named Susan Park, had been brought in specifically to rebuild. She signed every condition Meridian had demanded. The $50 million Child Safety and Passenger Advocacy Fund, the Independent Oversight Board, the complete overhaul of unaccompanied minor protocols, mandatory anti-discrimination training for every employee from CEO to baggage handler, a formal public on-camera apology to Marcus and his family. Susan Park delivered that apology herself. She flew to Chicago. She sat in David's living room. She looked at Marcus and she said, "On behalf of everyone at this airline, I am deeply sorry for what happened to you, Marcus. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be treated with dignity and kindness. We failed you, and I give you my word that we will spend every day making sure we never fail another child the way we failed you." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you, ma'am. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you going to make sure the nice flight attendants like Miss Kesha are the ones who take care of kids flying alone?" Susan Park's eyes filled. "Yes, Marcus. That's exactly what we're going to do." Marcus nodded. "Good, because Miss Kesha gave me cookies from first class. She didn't have to do that. She was just nice." Susan Park left David's apartment that afternoon and called her VP of operations from the car. "I want every unaccompanied minor on our airline to receive a first-class snack pack every flight starting immediately. Call it the Marcus Protocol. It was implemented within 2 weeks. Other airlines adopted it within months. In March, David Thompson established the Marcus Thompson Foundation for Children's Air Travel Safety. The foundation provided legal advocacy for families-funded research into airline treatment of unaccompanied minors and created a national hotline for reporting discrimination on flights. Kesha Williams was hired as the foundation's Director of Passenger Advocacy. She left the airline not because she had to, but because she wanted to do something bigger. Dorothy Henderson became the foundation's honorary board chair. At the announcement ceremony, she stood at the podium with her walker and said, "I'm 74 years old. I've lived through Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, and everything since. And I'm still fighting because the day we stopped fighting for our children is the day we stopped deserving them." In April, Marcus flew on an airplane for the first time since the incident. It was a short flight from Chicago to Atlanta, the same route in reverse. David sat beside him. Denise sat on the other side. Marcus held both their hands during takeoff. When the flight attendant came by with beverages, she smiled at Marcus and said, "What can I get for you, sweetheart?" Marcus looked up at her. "Apple juice, please." She poured it full to the top and set it down gently on his tray table. "There you go, honey. Thank you, ma'am." Marcus picked up the cup and took a long drink. Then he looked at his father and said, "Dad, this one's nice." David put his arm around his son. "Yeah, buddy, this one's nice." Marcus leaned against his father's shoulder and looked out the window at the clouds below them, white and endless and stretching to the horizon. He was 9 now. His nose had a slight bend at the bridge that would never fully straighten. He still had nightmares sometimes. He still got nervous around loud strangers. But he was on an airplane. He was in the air. He was flying again. And that was enough. That was everything. Sandra Whitley served 22 months at Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois. She was released on parole in August of the following year. She never worked in aviation again. She moved to a small town in downstate Illinois where nobody knew her face. She got a job at a garden center. She lived quietly. She never gave an interview. She never made a public statement, but once a month on the 14th, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter to Marcus Thompson. She never sent them. She put them in a shoebox in her closet. The letters were short. They all said some version of the same thing. "I am sorry for what I did to you. I was wrong. You deserved better. I hope you are well." She would write those letters for years. The shoebox filled then another. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't justice. It was just a woman alone in a kitchen, writing to a boy she had hurt, knowing the words would never reach him, writing them anyway because some debts can never be repaid. But you keep making payments all the same. And Marcus grew up. He played chess and read books and learned to fly remote control planes in the park with his father. He went to a good school. He made friends. He laughed often and loudly and with his whole body. He carried the scar on his nose the way his father said to carry it, as proof that he survived something, not as a mark of what was done to him, but as a reminder of who stood up. Dorothy Keisha, his mother, his father, strangers on a plane who recorded the truth, a jury who believed their own eyes, a nation that said, "No, not this child, not any child, not ever again." Years later, when Marcus was 17, a journalist asked him what he remembered most about that day on the airplane. Marcus thought about it for a moment. He didn't mention the kick. He didn't mention the blood. He didn't mention the pain or the fear or the humiliation. He said, "I remember my dad picked me up and carried me out of the press conference. I was way too big to be carried, but he picked me up anyway. And I put my face against his shoulder and I could hear his heartbeat. And I knew right then that as long as my dad's heart was beating, nothing in the world could break me." He paused. Then he smiled. "And I remember the cookie. I saved him a cookie from the plane, a chocolate chip one. He said it was the best cookie he ever had." The journalist asked if that was true. Marcus laughed. "It was a pretty average cookie, honestly. But that's what dads do. They make the small things feel like the biggest things in the world because that's what love is. It's not about money or power or contracts or courtrooms. It's about a man kneeling on a bloody floor holding his son and meaning it when he says everything's going to be okay. Power isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no child bleeds alone at 30,000 feet. And love isn't about what you own. It's about what you're willing to fight for when the person you love the most is the smallest person in the